So, today we are going to talk about another indicator of macroeconomic health or macroeconomic status of a country, and we will talk about unemployment, which is super important, as you all know, right. So far we have spoken about GDP, and we have seen how GDP is an important measure because it tells you about how much goods and services has been produced in a country, the total volume. Now, when you produce goods and services, the most important factor, the most important input that you need for producing goods and services is manpower or labor, right. You might have all the equipments, all the technology in the world, but it would be no good if you really did not have manpower that could be combined with all those capital goods, right. So, labor or manpower is an important factor for any country, whether it's developed or underdeveloped, whether it's rich or poor, manpower is important, right. So, as you produce more goods and services, as you produce a higher volume of goods and services, you will definitely have a higher nominal GDP, but at the same time you will be using more manpower to produce those goods and services, which means that the unemployment rate in the country likely should go down. In other words, there is an inverse relationship between the GDP and unemployment. For most countries and for most situations that will be true. As GDP goes up, the unemployment level in the country comes down, and as GDP comes down, the unemployment level in the country goes up. So, that means if reducing unemployment, if decreasing unemployment is really the objective of a country, then indirectly that purpose could be served by raising the GDP, doing something to raise the GDP of the country. And you know, raising the GDP of the country would be to increase the production of final goods and services in the country. So, everything, the reason I am telling you this is because I want you to understand that all these macroeconomic indicators at the end of the day are interlinked, right. If you try to address unemployment, you will have to address the issue of raising your GDP. If you have a falling GDP, then you will have an associated problem of rising unemployment in the country. So, these indicators and concepts are all interlinked, and they all together determine the macroeconomic status of a country. Now, for today, we will specifically focus on unemployment, and we will talk about the definition. We will first talk about the definition of unemployment and employment. Then we will talk about some mathematical concepts or formulae, and under these mathematical formulae we will talk about the unemployment rate, we will talk about the employment rate, we will talk about the labor force participation rate. Next, we will talk about the types of unemployment. And finally, we will talk about, we will talk about the problems with unemployment rate. So, we will talk about these concepts. So, let us start by talking about the definition of unemployment and employment. So, unemployment basically means unemployed is a person who does not have a job, but is actively looking for a job. So, that part is important, right. If you have not been in an economics class and I ask you who is an unemployed person, then your response would be a jobless person is an unemployed person, anybody who does not have a job. But by the definition that we have in economics, and really that definition is given by BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics in United States. BLS has defined unemployment as a situation where you do not have a job, but you have been actively looking for a job in the last 4 weeks. So that's the formal definition. You don't have a job, but you are actively looking for one, and you must have looked for a job in the last 4 weeks. Okay? So let's write that down. Unemployed refers to not having a job but actively searched in last 4 weeks. And only if you satisfy this definition of unemployment are you eligible for applying for unemployment benefits in United States. Any unemployment insurance or any kind of unemployment benefits, you are eligible to apply for it if you satisfy the formal definition of unemployment given by BLS. Now, employed is anybody, any person who has a job, of course, but has been working full-time or part-time, and by part-time we mean at least 15 hours per week. Now, full-time employment, many of us may think that it is 40 hours per week, but according to the definition of Bureau of Labor Statistics, anything above 35 hours is considered as full-time employment, and anything over 15 hours is considered as part-time employment, right? So, anybody who is employed full-time or part-time, that means anybody who has worked 15 hours or more is considered as an employed person. So, employed are everyone who are working full-time or part-time. Now, these two groups of individuals, the employed and the unemployed people, these two groups together, they form the labor force of a country. So, the employed and the unemployed people together form the labor force of a country, and the labor force is denoted by a capital L. So, please note that everyone who lives in a country, all residents of the country are not a part of the labor force. To be a part of the labor force, it is important for you to either have a full-time job or a part-time job. That means you should be working at least 15 hours per week, or you may not have a job, but you should be actively searching for one in the last 4 weeks. Then you become a part of the labor force. Anybody who is sitting at home, for example, maybe a stay-at-home mom raising a kid, she has not looked for a job in last 2 years, she does not contribute to the labor force of the country. Or maybe, you know, a CEO, he has been fired, but he has not searched for a job in the last 4 weeks, then he is not part of the current labor force of the country. Okay, that is what I mean, and that labor force is denoted by capital L. Now, based on the definition of labor force, we have the mathematical concept of unemployment rate and employment rate. Now, unemployment rate is denoted by a capital U. So, unemployment rate is basically the number of unemployed people. That means all those people who do not have a job but have actively searched in the last 4 weeks, divided by the labor force, that is this capital L, times 100. Once again, this is a rate. So, any rate would be a percentage number. It is, please note, it's not a dollar value, but it's a percentage number. So, it's the number unemployed divided by the labor force times 100. So, basically, this is the number of people unemployed divided by number unemployed plus number employed, because that is the definition of labor force, right? That's what you have in the denominator, times 100. That's the definition of unemployment rate. Similarly, we could define employment rate of the country and employment rate is denoted by capital E. So, capital E is the employment rate, and employment rate is given by number employed divided by the labor force, that is capital L, times 100. So, the denominator in both formulae are still the same. You have labor force in the denominator, but in the numerator you have the number unemployed in case of unemployment rate, and you have the number employed in case of employment rate. Now, besides these two numerical mathematical formulae, we have another mathematical formula which is the labor force participation rate. Let us see what do we mean by the labor force participation rate. The labor force participation rate basically tells you what part of your population, what proportion of your total population are actually contributing to the production process of the country, or have the potential of contributing, the desire to contribute to the production ability of the country. So, that is what labor force participation rate tells you. A labor force participation rate is the proportion of your total population that could contribute or currently contributing to the productive process of the country. So, labor force participation rate LFPR, the labor force participation rate. This is basically the labor force, that is the capital L that we spoke about, labor force divided by adult population. In United States, this is basically the population above 16 years of age, that is considered as the adult population by the definition of BLS, times 100, because once again it is a rate, so it is a percentage number. So, basically if you expand that formula, your numerator is number of employed plus number unemployed, because that is your labor force, divided by population above 16 years age times 100. Now, you can understand that if you have a population that is super young, if you have lot of people who are below the age of 16 years, then actually this denominator tends to be smaller, because you have a smaller proportion of people above 16 years of age. And then if the denominator is smaller, then the entire fraction would tend to be larger. So, really it is important to understand what proportion of the population is actually contributing. Just having, okay, these many people are employed and these many people are unemployed, if you had to kind of compare between countries, just knowing the number of employed and unemployed, or just knowing the total volume of the labor force is not enough, but it is important to know what proportion of your population is actually able to contribute to the productive process. Okay, that is why we have the labor force participation rate. So, the labor force participation rate is really a very important indicator, not just for the macroeconomic health for one country, but it is really helpful for cross country comparisons of the labor market of countries, right. So, if you have to compare between United States and India and Ethiopia and Brazil, so if you have a different set of countries and you want to compare the labor markets of those countries, the macroeconomic labor market, then the LFPR is really a very good rate. It gives you a standardized way to kind of compare between the labor markets, because in that case your labor force or your unemployment rate or your employment rate really don't help. These are important, the unemployment rate, employment rate, these things are important only within the country. So, you could look at unemployment rate of USA and say something about what is the status of the labor market of USA. So, if I say that the unemployment rate in United States in 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession was about 9.8%, and currently the unemployment rate of United States is about 1%, then it says that the US economy has done good in terms of reducing its unemployment rate. But if I say that the unemployment rate of USA is 1%, but the unemployment rate of India is 4.5%, well, you do get some information out of that, some economic information that India is having more unemployed people, but it is not really a good tool for comparison. What would be a better tool for comparison of labor market for countries would be the labor force participation rate. So these are good for intra-country, this is good for inter-country comparison. Okay. Now, let's spend a few more minutes on the definition of the labor force participation rate. Now, in the definition of labor force participation rate, it is important to understand whether there are any exclusions here in the denominator. Well, the answer is yes, because everyone above 16 years of age does not get included in there. There are some exclusions. The exclusions are completely retired individuals. So you might be above 16 years of age, but if you are completely retired, then you do not count because you are not contributing to the production process. Disabled individuals who are on disability benefits do not count because they do not have the ability to contribute. So if you are on disability benefit and you are not employed, you are not gainfully employed, then you do not count. However, you might be disabled, you might be getting some benefits, but you might be gainfully employed. By gainfully employed, I mean you might be earning a salary, then you do contribute to the production process, and then you do then you are included in here. Only if you are not gainfully employed and you are on disability benefits, then you are excluded. The third would be people in any kind of asylum or rehab or prison. They do not count because they are not currently contributing or cannot, really cannot be searching for contributing to the production process because they are in a special facility. So those people do not count. And also the military on active duty, they are excluded because military is just considered to be a separate sector. They might be stationed at different places, not really within the country. So on active duty military personnel are also not included in here. So everyone except these people above 16 years of age get included in the calculation of labor force participation rate. Now, next let us talk about the types of unemployment. In this class, we will talk about the three broad categories of unemployment. The first is frictional unemployment, and I will walk you through each type. Frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. Those are the three broad categories of unemployment. Now, all these three together, frictional, structural and cyclical, these three together form the actual unemployment of the country. Actual unemployment. One and two together, that is frictional and structural together, only these two are natural rate of unemployment. So frictional and structural together are natural rate of unemployment, and all three together is basically the actual rate of unemployment. So I could say that cyclical unemployment, cyclical is nothing but the difference between actual and natural rate of unemployment. Okay? This is for you to remember. Now, as we go through the definitions, you will kind of understand why we have that kind of an equation there and why the cyclical is really the difference between actual and natural. Now, frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment, as the very name suggests, it is basically the kind of unemployment that crops up in an economy due to friction between jobs when an individual is changing jobs or transitioning from one job to another, or trying to match his skill set with the suitable job. For example, I might be a college graduate. Let's say, you know, I'm graduating out of college with an MBA degree, and while I was in college, I was working, you know, I had to pay my bills, so I was working in a restaurant waiting tables. Now, as I graduate from the university with an MBA degree, I think that a better job should come my way and I should be employed in a better job. So, I am trying to find maybe an investment banking job, right? I don't want to wait tables anymore. So, I give up my table waiting job and I am trying to find an investment banking job. So, I am looking actively for job, right? But I am trying to find an investment banking job specifically and not any random job. So, any random job that comes my way, I am not taking that up and waiting for the right investment banking job to come my way. So, what I am really doing is I am transitioning from one job to another. So, I am transitioning from table waiting to investment banking, but at the same time I am also not taking up any random job, but waiting for the exact job or the suitable job that would suit my skills and my ability. So, then I would be considered as a frictionally unemployed person, because why I am unemployed is not because there are no jobs available, but the reason for my unemployment is because I am trying to match my skills to the best possible job that I want to take up. So, you can understand from this definition that frictional unemployment is not a cause of serious concern, and I would not be wrong to say that at some levels it is really a positive thing for a country, because if you have so many jobs available, the concept of picking and choosing would come in only if you have so many jobs to choose from, right? If the condition of the economy was super bad, then you would just have to take up any job that comes your way. The fact that you can wait and you can, you know, wait for the right job means that there are so many jobs to pick and choose from, and you have the let's say luxury of waiting for the right job. So, frictional unemployment basically means that you are transitioning from one job to another, you are looking for the right job, you are looking for the job that suits your skills and ability. Now, since you are actively looking, that's why you are still unemployed, and since you are jobless at this point in time, that's why you also qualify as an unemployed person according to the definition of BLS. Like I said, it is not a cause of serious concern. This kind of unemployment is natural to stay in the economy. In any economy, at any point in time, there will always be certain people who are transitioning from one job to another. There will always be some people who are looking for the best job, who do not want to take up any job that comes their way. So, it is natural for that kind of unemployment to stay in a country, and hence it is a part of the natural rate of unemployment. And once again reminding you that it is not a cause of serious concern, because that kind of unemployment will always persist in any economy, and at some levels it's actually a positive thing, because people have the option of picking and choosing, waiting for the right job, which talks about a good situation in the labor market of the country. Next, let's move on to structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is the kind of unemployment that crops in an economy due to structural changes in the labor market. Now, what do I mean by structural changes in the labor market? Structural changes in the labor market basically means something that changes the requirements from the workers or changes the very nature of the market. For example, let's say the automotive industry in Detroit, the automotive industry in Michigan, right? It used to be an industry where there was use of lot of manual labor, and lot of people were employed. I'm talking about many years ago. But that is an industry that went through very rapid, very fast paced automation, so that many jobs got transferred to technological, it got technologically advanced, and it got transferred to robots instead of human beings. So all those people who were employed in the auto industry in Michigan, many of them became redundant, their skill set became redundant, and they had to be fired. So the jobs that they were doing, maybe on the assembly lines for the cars, now started being done by robots. So these people did not have any skill set to work in the industry anymore, and they got thrown out of their jobs. So that means structural unemployment is basically talking about the aspect of redundancy of skills, right? Workers being thrown out of their jobs because they become obsolete, or their skill set becomes redundant, and they get replaced by either more superior workers, or they get replaced by machines and technology, or let's say robots, right? For example, you may have heard about the IBM Watson. There's a big deal, there's a lot of discussion that's there about IBM Watson taking away jobs of doctors, performing surgeries, and they say that Watson is also going to take up jobs of teachers, and it's going to do, artificial intelligence is going to come in, and it's going to take up all these jobs. So if in the years down the line that happened, if artificial intelligence was able to do all these jobs, like the jobs of doctors, the work of teachers, then all these people who have those skill sets of teaching or performing a surgery, they would find themselves redundant, and they would probably, a lot of them would probably lose their jobs, and that would be a kind of structural unemployment. So you're not losing your job because you want to change a job, you're not losing your job because there is rampant firing, but you're losing your job because you do not have the required skill set to do that job anymore. You have been replaced by something superior. And you not only have to be replaced, it is not necessary that you have to be replaced by technology, you could be replaced by superior manpower. For example, earlier a sales or marketing job could be done by a college graduate or maybe by a high school graduate. Now many jobs prefer like an MBA marketing, right? So a superior worker is preferred. So anybody who really had the sales skill but did not have that MBA marketing degree may not be able to find that job, or may be fired, right? So that's a structural change in the labor market. Or maybe let's say many unionization starts in a lot of industries. A lot of industries start unionizing and start bargaining for collective wages. That would also be a structural change in the labor market, and those kind of changes may lead to some amount of unemployment. Now also understand that that is also something which is likely to persist in a country very naturally, because every country is updating over time, it is structurally changing over time. So any kind of structural unemployment is also likely to persist in any country. It's natural, it's not a cause of serious concern, and hence it's a part of natural rate of unemployment. But what is important is the country needs to be aware of these kind of structural unemployment existing, and there must be some policies that are dedicated, some measures that are dedicated towards structurally unemployed people, right? So you don't want your people to become redundant and not have a job, because then they become a burden on the economy over a long term. So what you really need is to understand that these people have become obsolete and train them, give them required training for some other kind of job, right? For example, many years ago there were these typewriters that were used for purpose of typing. Now when computers came in, those typewriters got thrown away, and the typists did not have the skill set to have a job. But they were easily trained in typing on the computer, and many of them actually got back to the job market and actually found a job. So as much as the redundancy is true, as much as it is true that redundancy will happen, skill sets will need to be upgraded over time, it is also important that there must be recognition and realization of this problem, so that some measures may be taken, especially on-job training programs, rehab programs, so that the structurally unemployed people can be brought back into the labor market and can find gainful employment. Now, the next kind, cyclical unemployment, this is the one that is really a cause of concern for a country, because this is really the macroeconomic unemployment, right. So, this is the kind of unemployment that happens due to the macroeconomic condition in the country, right. So, this is also the kind of unemployment that is dependent on business cycles, and in a minute we will talk about business cycles. So, cyclical unemployment, and hence the name cyclical, because it depends on business cycles, that is why that name. So, cyclical unemployment is the kind of unemployment that happens due to recessions in a country. So, it really depends on the macroeconomic condition, and that is the kind of unemployment that is a serious cause of concern for the government, because it has happened due to something that went wrong in the macroeconomy. Now, what do we mean by business cycles? Let us talk about business cycles. Now, every economy moves in a cyclical movement, every economy. So, it gradually tries to progress, it reaches a peak, and once it reaches a peak, it starts coming down again, it reaches a pit, it reaches a trough, and again it starts rising and goes to a peak. So, every economy basically moves in a pattern like that. Okay. Now, it may so happen that the economy is moving like that, or it may also happen that the economy is moving like that, right. So, what I am saying, that the general trend, if you draw a trend line, then the general trend of the economy over time might be rising, or the general trend of the economy over time might be falling. And when I say time, I am not just talking about 1 day, 1 month or 1 year, but we are talking really about many years, let us say 50 years, 100 years, that is the time span we are looking at, right. So, over time, if you look at the US economy over time, you will see that the general trend of the US economy has been on a rise, okay. If you look at the Greek economy, if you look at the economy of Greece, then the general trend of the Greece economy may be going downwards, right. But that does not mean, even if the country has been rising, making progress, it does not mean that the country has never seen bad times. We know for United States, we had super bad time in 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession. So, what I am trying to say basically is the general trend might be upwards. Over the last 50 years, the country may have progressed, or over the last 50 years, the country may have disimproved, but within those 50 years, during that 50-year span, there may have been mountains and valleys, there may have been crests and troughs, and those crests and troughs are basically the business cycles. This trend is not the business cycle. That upward and downward movement of the economy over time is the business cycle. So, when you move from one crest to another crest, that is one business cycle, a crest or a peak. Okay. When you move from one trough to another trough, that is also a cycle. So, that is a trough or a pit. Okay. And every economy will move that way. Now, how long, how many years it might take to go from one peak to another peak, or from one trough to another trough, that really depends on other conditions in the economy. But every economy that goes up must come down. So the law of gravitation, which works in physics, also works in economics. So you can see how the name social science is justified, right? So we do see some principles of science that also works for the economy, right? You can see this is Newton's third law, basically the law of gravitation. Everything that goes up must come down. Okay, so whenever the economy is coming from a peak into a trough, this region where it is coming down, that decline, this phase is known as a recession. So whenever the country is coming from a peak towards a trough, that falling phase is recession, and that is when cyclical unemployment tends to be super high during that falling phase, during that recessionary phase. Now once it hits the pit, then again the country starts going up, and that is known as recovery. For example, the US economy right now is on a recovery. It has been on a recovery since 2010. We had the Great Recession, the recession that was driven by the housing market in 2008-2009, which was the biggest or the most serious kind of recession after the Great Depression of 1931. And since then we have been on a phase of recovery. Initially the recovery was really flat, as in, you know, it wasn't this steep, it was a flat recovery, and now it has been a steep recovery over the last couple of years. And some economists are of the view that we are almost inching close to a peak, because if you look at the unemployment rate of United States, the unemployment rate is really low right now. So they are economists are of the view that we are inching very close to the peak, which means there might be another recession really round the corner. We don't know whether how deep that recession will be. We don't know how serious that recession might be, but some economists are definitely of the view that we are going to hit a recession very soon, and it might be driven actually by the credit card industry or by the retail industry, because in United States, you know, consumerism is a big thing. So people spend a lot on credit cards. You know, there are a lot of unmonitored loans that have been given out in the economy, which very little chances of recovery. So that might be something which might trigger the next recession. Well, I'm not saying that, you know, bigger economists are saying that, but you know, that could be true. Okay. So for this class, we understand that whenever the economy is going into a recession, that is when the cyclical unemployment is super high, and that's a cause of concern, that's a red flag. So the government needs to start, you know, acting on it. And whenever it hits the rock bottom, that is when it starts going up again, which is the phase of recovery. Now then, where is depression here, right? Where does depression really fit in? Depression is the worst kind of recession. So another word for this trough or pit is basically depression. So depression is nothing but the worst kind of recession. Now the last time United States really saw depression was in 1931. Since then it has only been recessions. Now you can ask me that how do you know that, you know, a recession has become a depression, or for that matter how do you even know that recession has started? Well, it's an official declaration. It is the government that needs to officially announce that, okay, we are now in a recession, and it is the government that officially needs to tell you that, okay, the recession is bad enough to be called a depression. For example, in 2008-2009, you know, it was a serious situation for United States. The unemployment rate had gone as high as 10%, an all-time high, and yet the government did not call it a depression. They said it was a great recession, but did not call it a depression, because you have to understand that now really the world has opened up. A country like United States, whatever happens in USA has repercussions on the global economy. It has repercussions everywhere. If people lose jobs here, people do lose jobs elsewhere. All economies are interlinked. So the government has to be really sensitive to how they kind of project the economic situation of a country to the global market, right, to the global audience. If a country is large, an economy as large as USA, and says that, okay, you know, we are in deep trouble, we are in depression, that's going to cause a serious repercussion effect in the global economy. So the government has to be really sensitive. Of course, they couldn't help but call it recession because it was such a bad situation. So they had to kind of officially say that, okay, it is a recession and it's a great recession. But if we look at the numbers, then the numbers were serious enough to be called a depression because it was as bad as the Great Depression of 1931. Okay? But just remember that it's an official declaration, and in many cases smaller recessions always happen, and sometimes the government does not even call it a recession, does not officially declare it as a recession because they are small enough and they know that the government knows that the economy can kind of soon go into the path of recovery. Okay. So these business cycles, especially the recessionary stage, is what is responsible for cyclical unemployment, and that is the one that is a serious cause of concern for any government. Now this is not just true for USA, it's true for any other country, but it is more serious for USA because I just told you that USA is a very large economy, and whatever happens in USA has larger repercussions, effects worldwide. Okay. Now we are almost towards the end of the discussion of unemployment. Now let's talk about a few criticisms and a few advantages of using unemployment rate as an indicator of macroeconomic health, right? So we said when we began the chapter, we said that we were looking at unemployment because it was another measure like GDP which could tell you about your macroeconomic condition, right? It could tell you whether you are in a recessionary phase or a recovery phase. It could tell you whether there needs to be a red flag or everything is smooth and fine in the economy, right? So let us talk about, if you have a high unemployment rate or you have a low unemployment rate, what does it tell you, or does it really give you the real picture of the macroeconomic situation of the country? The answer to that question is no. So unemployment rate, according to many economists, according to many public policies, it's not really a great measure for macroeconomic condition of a country. The reason being that unemployment rate could suffer from overestimation or underestimation problem, and I'll talk to you in a minute about what we mean by these. So it could suffer from a problem of overestimation or underestimation. Now what do we mean by overestimation? It may mean that the unemployment rate is actually 9%, but the problem is not as difficult or as serious as that. The real problem is not a 9% unemployment. It is giving you a very exaggerated picture. That is what overstatement means. And it can overstate the problem because remember, your actual unemployment rate includes frictional, structural and cyclical, right? So that 10% unemployment rate includes the frictionally unemployed people, includes the structurally unemployed people and the cyclically unemployed people, right? So the frictional unemployment may be very high and that might be giving you a very high unemployment number, right? But we just talked about the fact that frictional unemployment is not really a cause of concern. It might be a good thing for the country. So sometimes that unemployment number may be really exaggerating the problem. It may be including those people who are actually looking for a better job, who are looking for a better match of their skill set, and not just focusing on the people who really don't have any jobs, have no options, right? So it may be overstating the actual problem. It may be exaggerating the actual problem and raising an alarm. Similarly, there may be a problem of understatement. So the unemployment rate may be really, very high and must be even higher, but it is giving you an understated picture of the real problem. And that could happen due to discouraged workers. So I may be a person and I could have looked for a job for 1 year and I have not found a job and I just gave up looking for a job and I'm sitting at home right now, right? So according to the definition of unemployment, I am not an unemployed person because I have not looked for a job in the last 4 weeks. However, the real story is that I looked for 1 year, I got discouraged, I didn't find anything, and that's why I'm sitting at home, right? So, for example, during the Great Recession, the unemployment rate was 9.8%. It touched almost that level. But you know, the problem was even more serious because so many people got fired from their jobs. They searched for jobs, did not find anything, and finally gave up on their job search. So those people were not being recorded officially as unemployed, but actually they were. Those were the discouraged workers who were sitting at home because they looked for a job for long enough and did not find one, right? And once they gave up searching for a job, they stopped being counted as unemployed officially, right? So you can understand that unemployment rate suffers from both problems of overestimation and underestimation. Overestimation due to the frictionally unemployed people and underestimation due to discouraged workers. So what really is a better measure of the labor market is employment rate, honestly, because employment rate actually tells you that how many people are actually contributing to the production process of the country. So many economists, and you know, in economics always there is, you know, you will always see a tug of war. Some people will say this is good, the other people will say this is good, right? So there is never one rule. So many people are of the view, and I kind of conform to that view, that employment rate is actually a better measure of the labor market situation in a country, because unemployment rate is plagued by these problems of overestimation and underestimation. Now, when we go on to the problem solving video in this chapter, we will look at how to calculate the employment unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate. So, the formulae that we just talked about towards the middle part of the class, that is what you will need to memorize, and we will work out some numerical problems using those, and we will also work on some small cases where we have to identify whether that person is employed or unemployed. So those are the kind of questions that we will deal with in this chapter.